Hi everyone, welcome to our 5.2 lesson. This is part 1. We're looking today at how to use tables and graphs to show frequency, and we're just going to go up to a certain part of our notes here, and then we're going to stop, and part 2 will be continued later. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So last lesson in 5.1, we learned some basic terms that are used in statistics, like the range, the median, the mean, and the mode. And we're going to learn another term today, which is frequency. Okay, and frequency is a word that we use all the time in life. So if something occurs many times or multiple times, we might say that's a frequent event. So for example, if you won the lottery 5 times in your life, you might say, "Hey, that's pretty. I've won the lottery, 5 times. That's frequent, right? That's a little bit unusual, but it's also frequent." And there's lots of things that we could say are frequent. For example, if we get in the month of November, if we got 4 really big rainstorms, we might say, "Oh, that's pretty frequent. We've had 3 big rainstorms or 4 big rainstorms in a month." Okay. So the word frequency then refers to how many times, okay, something happens. And in statistics, where we're looking at numbers, we say that if we see a number appearing multiple times, we would say, first of all, that the value of that number would be the mode. And we would say that the frequency is the number of times that I see that data value. Okay, so frequency and mode are different. The mode refers to what the actual value is, okay, and the frequency refers to how many times you see that value. So here's a good example. If 3 students scored 100% on a Math 11 quiz, okay, 3 students score 100%, well, 100% is the mode, okay, because I see it occurring multiple times, 3 times in this case. But we would say that the frequency of that score is equal to 3. Okay, and we use the small letter f to refer to frequency, and we would say that f is equal to 3, okay, for the score of 100%. Often in statistics, we have many data values that we have to either use or analyze. And so it's easy when you're looking at, say, 10 different data values in a table to say how frequent, one of those data values is. When you have a lot of data to analyze, it's really difficult to look at it all in a table, and it's helpful to start to group things together. So it's helpful to take data values that are similar or within a close range and group them into intervals, and then talk about the frequency, pardon me, of those groups rather than individual data values if I have a lot of data to look at. So what we do in statistics, if we have lots of data, is we organize the data into groups. And by groups, another word for that is intervals. Okay, so a group of data would be, for example, a bunch of data values that are very close in values. Okay, we could put them together into a group. And another group would be the next bunch of data values that are pretty close, okay, in terms of what their value is. So we organize the data into groups, and then we can tabulate, this means put them into a table, okay, tabulate the frequency. So the number of times that we see, okay, data values for that group. So organizing the data into groups is much easier to look at. It's easier for us to draw some conclusions, okay, about the data. So to make some assumptions or make some, be able to say, get a better idea of what the data is telling us. And we can also compare multiple sets of data. Okay, so for example, if we had all the marks from one math class, we could put that into a frequency table, and then we could compare it to 4 or 5 other math classes. Okay, so it's possible to look at more than one set of data when we use frequency tables. So let's go ahead and talk about how we make a frequency table. Okay, so here's an example. We have exam marks for a class of Math 11 students, and the exam is out of 50 marks. Okay, and here's all of the marks for students, okay, for one class. Okay, we're going to come back to that in just a moment. How to make a frequency table. There's a few steps, and they're very simple. Okay, the first thing is we're going to make a table with 3 columns. Okay, and the first column we're going to call it either intervals. We can also call it groups here. Okay, so instead of writing data values in my first column and listing every single different mark, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just group the marks together, okay, and I'm going to put some groups here instead of individual values. Okay, the next column is going to be a tally column. We're going to keep score of how many times we see a value in that group. And then at the end, okay, we're going to count up all our tally scores and put a number for frequency. Okay, so F is going to be equal to a number here. Okay, so the intervals that we make are going to be groups of whatever it is that we're measuring. Okay, so in this case, we're going to take our exam marks and we're going to group the exam marks into groups or intervals. So let's go ahead and look at how we do that. So to determine how big your group should be, okay, and how many intervals you need, there's a couple of quick rules to help us. So the first thing I want to think about is, well, let's go back, and here's my data set again, okay, down at the bottom of your page. And you can see there that we have quite a few numbers to look at, okay. I'm going to have to decide how many groups in total I want. And so the rule of thumb is that you want to have somewhere in between 5 to 12 groups. Okay, this is a rule of thumb. If you have too many groups, more than 12, there's still too much data to look at. Okay, if you have not enough groups, if you took all of this data and put it into one group, for example, that wouldn't tell you anything. So we want to make sure that we have somewhere in between 5 to 12 groups. Okay, you have to decide for yourself. And so there's no right answer here. So some people might decide to make 6 groups. Some people might decide to make 8 groups. It's just a matter of you making that decision, how many groups you want to have. But a good way to figure it out, your group size. Okay, your group size can be determined by taking the range of your data, so looking at the spread, and dividing it by the number of intervals that you'd like to have. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our range first for this particular question. Okay, so let's find the range of test scores. I want to know from, what's my lowest score to my highest score. Just give me an idea of the range of data that I'm working with. So if I come down here, okay, remember that your range is your biggest value minus your smallest value. So in this case, it's going to be our biggest score or mark, okay, minus the lowest mark. Okay, and so the range here, if I look at my data scores, 50 out of 50 looks like the biggest mark, the greatest mark, and the lowest mark that I have is 25. So 50 minus 25 is equal to 25. So my data ranges by 25 marks. Okay, another way to say that is my data ranges from 25, okay, to 50. That's the range of my data. The lowest is 25 and the highest is 50. The difference between them is the range, and it's equal to 25. So I have to come up with a number of groups that I want here for my table. And we might look at that and say, well, 25, I could have 5 groups. Okay, that would be a good guess. So I could go ahead and again, you could have more than, you could have 10 groups. Okay, it's up to you. I'm going to go ahead and say, I think because I only have a total of 20 data values altogether, just looking at it, I think that 5 groups should be enough. Okay, so let's go ahead and say I'm going to have 5 groups. So that's my decision. So I'm going to say right here, so I will have 5 groups or 5 intervals. All right. So how big do I want to make each interval? Okay. To figure out my interval size, I'm going to take the range, which is 25, and divide it by the number of intervals or number of groups I want to have, which is 5. And 25 divided by 5 is 5. So my groups are going to range, or the interval size of my groups is going to be equal to 5 marks. Okay, so I'm going to start with the lowest one, and I'm going to go up by 5 marks for every group. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's my first interval, and I'm going to start with the lowest mark, which is 25. Okay, and I'm going to go all the way up to 30. Okay, so my interval size is 5 marks here. So 25 to 30, okay, will be my first group. The next group I will make it'll be from 30 to 35. Okay, but one thing I want to be careful of here is that if I put the number 30 to 35 as my interval size, I am going to run into a little bit of a problem if I have a student who has a mark that's out of 30. So if we have a look here, in this case, there is not a student that has a mark out of 30, but if there was, okay, I would be unsure whether to put a tally score here or a tally score here, okay, if I see the same number, okay, in 2 different groups. So what we do instead in statistics is we just say, okay, let's make the next group from 31 to 35. Okay, even though that's actually only a difference of 4, it's not 5, which is what I have said I'm going to do over here. That's okay, okay, because at least it makes sure that our data is accurate and we're not counting any value more than once, okay, because that will lead to problems for us. So we'll make the next group from 36, okay, up to 40. Okay, and then the next group will go up to 45, but we'll start it at 41. Okay, and the next group will go up to 50, but we'll start it at 46, just so that we don't count a score of 45 twice. Okay, so there I go. In total, I have 5 groups. Okay, and the interval size is 5 marks. And now what I'm going to do is make my frequency table. So I'm going to look at all my data, and every time I have a data value that falls into one of these groups, I'm going to put a tally mark for it. Okay, so let's start in order. So let's start with let's look at our scores. Again, you can go through your scores, okay, or you can look for scores that are between 25 and 30. Okay, that's fine. Or you can just go right through them and say 48 and put it in the correct column. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just tally it looking at the table. Okay, so 48. Okay, there's one score, so I'm going to put 48. That's going to fall right in here between 46 and 50. So there's one score that's in that interval. Okay, the next one is 37. And 37 will be in this group right here between 36 to 40. Okay, 29 is going to fall within my first group from 25 to 30. Okay, and you get the idea here. 47, okay, will be in the last group. A score of 50 is also in the last group. Okay, 38 is right here in the third group. Okay, 28 is in between 25 and 30, so it's going to go in the first group. 25 is also going to go in that first group. Okay, 49 is going to go here. 42, and I cross them out as I go just to make sure I'm only counting the data once. 42 is going to fall in the fourth group. 39 is in between 36 and 40, so it goes here. 43, okay, and you can continue to do this. 45 is going to fall right here. 44 is also going to fall there in group 4. Okay, 31 is going to be in my second group. 29 will be in my first group. 48 is going to be in my last group. And now that I've come to, instead of putting one more tick mark here, when we tally, we usually show a 5 as a crossing through. Okay, again, I don't care if you want to just do another tick mark and add them up, that's fine. This is usually how we show 5. Okay, 33 is going to be right here. 39 is going to be in my third group between 36 and 40. And the last one, 42, is falling into my fourth group, and that's going to be 5 for that fourth group as well. So our tally score just makes it easy. Now my frequency, okay, I'm going to put a value for F here. And here I'm just going to report a number. So you're going to add up your tally scores. So how many times did we see a score in the first group? Well, 4 times. Okay, so I just look at the tally scores and I add them up. Okay, the next interval has a frequency of 2. The next interval has a frequency of 4. The last 2 have frequencies of 5. If you added up all your frequencies here, okay, 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 plus 10 at the end. Okay, adding up all your frequencies will give you 20 here. And that number, when you add up all your frequencies, it should be equal to the number of values in your total data set. It has to be, because you should have counted each one of those data values only once. Okay, so it's always a good check to make sure you haven't missed anything. If I look at my data set and I add them up, n is equal to 20 here. I had 20 values, and I should also have 20 total. My f value, when I add all my f values up, should also equal 20. Okay, so what I actually have here, it's a little bit easier to look at now. What I can see is that 4 students, okay, had scores in the lower range, 25 to 30. 2 students scored between 31 and 35. 4 students scored between 36 and 40. 5 students scored between 41 to 45, and 5 students scored in the highest range, which was 46 to 50. So it's it gives us a little bit better picture of how our data is spread out without looking at so many values. So this is how we set up a data table, or a frequency table. We can also go ahead and graph that table that I've just made. And graphs are really handy because they give us a visual picture of what that data looks like. Okay, so instead of a table, I could take those values that I have, the groups and the frequencies, and I can plot them against each other. So there's 2 types of frequency graphs that we use most often, and one of them is called a frequency histogram. And a histogram is a bar graph. Okay, and on the bar graph, we plot frequency versus our groups, or our data intervals. Okay, and so frequency is on our y-axis here, and I put my group intervals, okay, on my x-axis. So again, those are, if I look back at my data table for a minute, this is what I would be, these intervals is what I am plotting on my x-axis. And then I would plot the frequency, okay, these guys here, on my y-axis. And I would do a bar graph, which just gives me a quick visual picture of where my data lies, okay, or how my data is distributed. A bar graph uses rectangles to show the frequency of each interval. So for example here, if I look at this interval right here, so from 20 to 30, okay, that could be, in this case it's saying it's looking at the size of, it says data bin, but this could be, again, this could be marks, like how many people score between 20 to 30 on a test. Okay, I would come over here and I can see that the frequency is equal to 6. Okay, so there were a total of 6 times where data values were in this range. Okay, or 6 students scored between 20 and 30. The other type of graph we use is called a polygon, and this is just a line graph. Okay, so it's not a bar graph. Okay, and what we do here is we simply plot. Instead of using a rectangle, we just plot a point, okay, for the frequency. Again, it's frequency versus the intervals. And we can either plot on the x-axis, we can either put the intervals, or sometimes we can also put the midpoints. So these numbers here that we put along our x-axis can be either midpoints for the interval, So we can plot the midpoint of each interval. Okay, or we can plot the whole interval. Okay, so over here, for example, the interval was 0 to 10. Okay, if I put that interval on a frequency polygram, I could either say 0 to 10. Okay, so I could, right here could be 0 to 10. Okay, or I could also say 5, which is this midpoint of that data. Okay, the center. And we use just a dot to represent the frequency for each one of our groups. And then we simply connect the dots so that we get a graph out of it. Okay, so by connecting the points, we get what's called a polygon, or some sort of a shape will be formed from our graph. Let's go ahead and try graphing the data that we just made a frequency table for. Let's graph it both ways, as a bar graph, as a histogram, and also as a polygon. So here's how you graph any data set. Okay, you start by making your frequency table. Okay, and when you go to graph it, you're going to graph it with your y-axis labeled as frequency, and your x-axis will be labeled as groups or intervals. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So it would look something like this. Okay, for every graph that you make, frequency is always going to be plotted on your y-axis. So your y-axis is frequency, and down here on the bottom, okay, your x-axis is going to be your groups or your intervals. Use your frequency table, okay, to mark the frequency for each interval, and then create your bar graph. Okay, so form those rectangles or connect all the data points, okay, to form a polygon. So let's do a real one together, following these 3 steps. We're going to use the class data from the example that we were working on just now, and we're going to do 2 graphs here, okay, on the same graph paper. One's going to be a histogram and one's going to be a polygon, just to show you one of each. So I get out my ruler and I say frequency is going to be plotted on my y-axis. And on my x-axis, I'm going to show the intervals. So down here, this is going to be my intervals. I'm just going to leave some space because I want to be able to put the interval values underneath my x-axis. So let's first make a histogram, which is our bar graph. So we're going to have to use our data in order to do this. So we're going to go back to using our frequency table. We're going to look at, well, how many intervals did I have and what were their values? So let's go back for a moment and have a look at the frequency table that we made. And here it is right here. Okay, so the 2 things that I'm going to be plotting are the intervals against the frequency. Okay, so the first interval was from 25 to 30, and then 31 to 35, and it went all the way up to 50. So I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups that I have to put on my bottom axis, and I'm going to label my axis just like this. So the first group is going to go from 25 to 30. When you're doing a polygon or a histogram, you don't have to start your x-axis from 0, okay? So it's not necessary to do that. We can start here, we can start anywhere we want, okay? So if I'm going to do a histogram, I'm going to go ahead and let's make this first marking here my first group. So this first marking is going to be from 25 to 30. Okay, there was my first group. The next group is going to be from 31 to 35. Okay, and then 36 to 40. And then 41 to 45. And the last one was from 46 to 50. So there is my 5 groups. And then on my y-axis, I'm going to be plotting frequency. So again, let's come back and have a look at the numbers that we got for frequency. And if you look at your frequency values, okay, that tells you how to set up your y-axis. In this case, the biggest number that I have for frequency is 5. So I definitely need to go up to 5 on my y-axis. It's up to you whether you want to start from 0 to 5, okay, or you could even start at 1 or 2. Okay, you're allowed to start at your lowest value as well. And there's no right way to do that. Okay, I recognize that I only have to go up to 5, so I'm just going to start at 0 because I'm not pressed for space here. Okay, so let's go ahead and say on my y-axis, I'm going to make each one of these equal to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and now I'm going to create a bar graph. So for the first group, 25 to 30, if we come back and have a look at our frequency, the frequency was 4. Okay, the next one was 2, 4, 5, and 5. So you're going to use your frequency table, and now you're just going to simply put in a rectangle to show the frequency for each group. So the first one was 2. So I'm going to go up to 2, okay, and I'm going to show that as a rectangle, and then I would shade it or color it in. Okay. You can leave it like that, even you don't have to shade it. Okay, you can just leave it as a rectangle. Sorry, that first one was 4. I apologize. 4, not 2. So let's bring that up to 4. Okay, and the next one was 2, so we'll bring, okay, the next group, we show the frequency at 2. Okay, and again, you could shade it. The next group is up at 4 again, so right there. So there's my next bar graph. And then the last two were at 5. Okay, so the next group is going to be all the way up to 5. And then the last group was also at 5. So 2 rectangles at 5. So there's my histogram, and it gives me a quick visual representation of how many students fell within each of these mark intervals. Let's also do a polygon. On the same graph, we can do a polygon here. Okay. Again, I'm just going to come over a little bit. You would do these on 2 graphs, but for space, that's okay. We can use the same graph paper. I'm just going to start my values on my x-axis again over to the right. So this time we can either plot the intervals again, so you could set it up the same way on the x-axis. You can also plot the midpoints, and I want to show you how to do that. Okay, so rather than plotting the interval, the first interval of 25 to 30, I could also put just the midpoint of that interval. The midpoint is the value that's right in between 25 and 30. So to find the midpoint, of an interval, we take the average value of that interval. Okay, that's all it is. It's just an average value. So we'll just take the average of the interval. Okay, so for example, okay, for 25 to 30, that's my interval. Okay, the midpoint would be, well, the average of those two numbers, all I'm looking for is the center value. You might be able to recognize it right away. It's going to be 27.5. That's the center or the midpoint of that interval. But you can also mathematically figure it out by adding the two together, okay, and dividing by 2. So we're just taking an average of those two values. Okay, and I should put a little arrow there. That's my interval. Okay, so I get from that 25 plus 30 is 55. Divided by 2, so 27.5 is the midpoint for that interval. So instead of writing the intervals, I can also write midpoints. So we could go ahead and start our data right here, okay? And I'm going to write 27.5. That's the midpoint for that interval. Okay, the next one is going to be halfway between 31 and 35, which is 32.5. Okay, the next one will be halfway between 35 to 40, okay, which will be 37.5. Okay, and the next one will be 42.5. And the last one will be 47.5. Okay, and all I've done there is I've just, and you may have a slightly different midpoint if you're using the value 31 and 35 rather than 30 and 35. Okay, and again, it's really not making any difference to your data as long as you have your midpoint might be a little different if you choose to use the value 31. Okay, plus 35 divided by 2 instead of 30 plus 35 divided by 2. But again, it's still accurate, okay, and you're still portraying your data the same way. So now instead of a bar graph, I'm just going to put a point for each of those frequencies. So it's the data is the same. Okay, for the first group, we had an interval of a frequency of 4 for that interval. So I'm going to put here a data point at 4, okay, where I have an x value of 27.5 or a midpoint of 27.5. The next one is going to be at 2. Okay, so I'm coming down to 2. Okay, the next group had a frequency of 4, and then 5, and then 5. Okay, so to go ahead and plot that polygon, I just connect those dots. Okay, and there I go. Okay, so that's a polygon. A couple of things that we should notice about graphed frequency graphs and frequency tables. Things to notice. You can show the intervals along the horizontal axis, or you can also show the midpoints. And so when we're looking at them, if you only see one value, okay, so for example here, if you only see one value, you know that's a midpoint. If you see an interval, you know it's an interval. And you have a choice, okay, on what you would like to do. We only show the data as groups. So even if there's a midpoint, it's still talking about a group or an interval. So you can't see individual data values. You're only seeing the frequencies, okay, for values that were within that group. So that is important. When you're looking at that, you're getting an idea of how many times we have values in a particular interval, but you can't see the individual values. So going back to our example with the marks from math, okay, when I look at my graph, I can't actually see these individual values, right? All I can see is the number of times they fell within a range, but I can't see individual values from that, and that is important to recognize. If we can't see individual values, then we can't accurately determine what the lowest value was and what the highest value was. Okay, and we actually can't determine what the median or the middle value would be as well, just by looking at a graph or a frequency table, because we can't see individual values. Frequency polygons are really useful for us because we can use them on more than one set of data, and we can graph them on top of each other. So here's an example down below where there's three frequency polygons graphed on top of each other, showing us the weights of babies when they're born. Okay, and as you can see there, okay, so this is from the States, data from the States, and the first polygon is showing us the weights of Caucasian babies, and another one is showing us the weights of African American babies. And we can compare sets of data then by putting the same polygon on one graph, or sorry, more than one polygon on the same graph. So they're really useful for us. Give us a nice visual representation. That's it for now. I'd like you to do a little bit of practice setting up frequency tables, as well as drawing a graph for yourself, a histogram and a polygon. So I'd like you to try on your worksheet 5.2, questions number 1 to 4. And that is the end of part 1 for the 5.2 lesson. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.